It's 2 o'clock in the morning, but in this video I'm going to be letting you know my thoughts on the newly released GH6. Join me. Well, hi YouTube, Brian James at Micro Four Thirds guy with you once again, and this is a quick broadcast just straight off the hot off the press after watching the GH6 launch. So it's about, what time is it here? It's 2:09 AM in the UK. So I'm really I'm holding the eyeballs open a little bit after seeing the launch broadcast from Lumix, but really interesting. Now that broadcast was an hour long. So I'm going to try and bring you a bit of a condensed version of what I've gleaned from that. The specs have already been released, so you'll all know the specs, but I'll go through some of the salient ones on this. And I think it's a really exciting camera. Now, I'm not a videographer, as I've said in the past. I make videos for YouTube, but I'm not what I class as a videographer. I don't use video cameras to the most. So again, I'm not making any comments particularly on the effectiveness of the video, apart from what I've gleaned online. But there's some interesting twists for still photographers, and I'll come to those in a moment. So apologies for the fact that I keep on looking down at my notes and the handwritten, which means I'll probably stumble a few times trying to actually read my own writing. But the big point on this one is it's a 25.2 megapixel MOS sensor. That's quite a big jump. That's a 5 megapixel jump up from what's been the standard in Micro Four Thirds for a while. And this is coming into some of the controversy as to what's happened with the OM1 launch from Olympus, sticking at 20 megapixel. This is 25.2, but it's not a stacked sensor. So we're going to be, I think, seeing lots of debates over the differences in the next few weeks. It has the new Venus engine for the processing, which I think is going to be really interesting because that's given a huge amount of new possibilities on that. 7.5 stop 5-axis dual IS2 image stabilization, and that really is again putting the up in the ante quite a lot. That's fantastic image stabilization on that, and I'd be really interested to see what the results of that will be. Of course, because of the dual IS, if you're using any of the Power OIS zoom lens, Power OIS lenses from Lumix, they'll integrate well into that. And it's got a much higher dynamic range over the older GH5 as well. And I'll come to dynamic range in a few moments because there's a lot on that. For the video people, a few little bits and pieces on that. It's got built-in V-Log and V-Gamut modes on there, and they are unlimited, so you've got unlimited recording on that. 12 plus stops of dynamic range, more than 12 stops of dynamic range, but they've got the new boost mode, which takes you to 13 stops, more than 13 stops dynamic range, and that's available on both video and stills. So that's where it's really coming in. I'll come back to that in a few moments because how that works is quite interesting. Effectively, I'm going to skip the specs for the video, but effectively you're getting up to, if you're shooting in any of the ranges apart from 300, let's say 300 frames per second, which is the variable frame rate. If you're in any other mode, it's a high frame rate, and that will be able to write directly to. No, I got that wrong. I knew I was going to get my things wrong here. You can get up to 120 frames per second and high frame rate mode, but you can also get variable frame rate up to 300 frames per second, 300 frames per second, and that's at full HD. So really, fantastic slow motion stuff if you're going at that. You slow that down to 24p, you've got some amazing slow motion straight out the camera on that one. It will record 422 10-bit, 5.7K, 60p. 420 10-bit, 5.8K at 30p, and if you want to go to 60p on that, it's 4.4K that you're recording in. And in ProRes, 5.7K 30p, and that's 422, and that's high quality on that. Now basically the ProRes, This is 2 card slots on it. It's got the CF Express card, and it's also got a UHS-2 card in it. You can write any of the video modes to either of the cards, except when you're going on to the ProRes mode. And because of that, you've got what about 1900 megabits, 1900 megabits a second. That's only going to go to the CF Express card, but apart from that, any of the video modes will go to either of the cards, so you can still do dual backups if you like, live backups to the 2 cards. Price has been announced as $21.99 US or $21.99 euros, and I presume you're probably going to get it at $21.99 UK pounds as well. That's a recommended retail price. No doubt there'll be special deals on that, and also they're talking about special deals on the pre-orders. Some places are getting CF cards, and that's a couple of $100 worth of card with it. So you could be getting CF cards with it, you could be getting cashbacks, whatever it is in individual markets, individual countries. It does have a newer battery. Now the battery is changeable for the older GH5 battery, but remember on this one, the newer battery that they've got on this, if you're using the newer battery, that's going to get you all the extra features. And the reason it's doing that is it keeps the heat down slightly. It's using higher voltage, 9 volts, but that because it's using 9 volts is lower current, so you're getting lower thermal dynamic issues on that. So really, if you want to get the most out of the camera, keep it on the new style battery. It comes with a charger, you'll be pleased to know. It's a PD USB charger on there, and there's various charging options along with it. And I've also got an external charger which will allow you to trickle charge a battery as well as running this as well, and it will charge on camera as well as charge with its charger which is supplied with it. Let's see. They're already planning firmware updates, as they do with most of these things, but there's been a bit of a release as what's coming. And the reason that they're doing firmware updates already before the camera's actually hitting the markets, because the camera's going to hit the markets early March. But why they're doing firmware updates at the moment is it means that they can test everything that they've got now, the things that they have in the pipeline, rather than put out a half-hearted sort of thing and have to be fixed later. They want to make sure everything's tested and going out. So therefore, anything that they haven't had time to 100% test to its maximum will go out at a later firmware update. So although you're buying the camera now, again, like a lot of these things with Lumix and Olympus, there are firmware updates which will take the camera into a different place again. On the first firmware update, they're already talking about the fact that you're going to have SSD recording over USB. So you'll be able to plug a USB cable into an SSD card, an external SSD card, and take your data, your recorded data, straight to the SSD card from there. Now that's coming in the first firmware update. That's going to be fantastic. It really is going to be useful, things like that. Future firmware update. Sorry about the voice, by the way. A little bit of a cold, and if you see my previous video, you'll know that I've had some serious dental work done today, so I'm struggling a little bit talking. But some of the things you're going to get on future plans: RAW over HDMI, RAW data. So if you want RAW data sent out to the HDMI socket, that's going to be coming on that. There's going to be more ProRes modes, so that's going to be really interesting. So they're expanding the video modes which are going to be going on. 4K and DCI format's going to be planned on that. 4K 120p is in the pipeline as well, and 4K 120 over HDMI. And some of the restrictions that they've got, and as they were saying on the broadcast, is the fact that although they can do an awful lot more on the camera, there's not the external equipment on the market at the moment to be able to handle it. So it's no good actually creating something in the camera which isn't going to be able to be used. Brings us on to photography now, and I'm really interested in what's going to be happening with the stills photography side, because this is where more my interest is. Really good noise levels, and because of the using that, the sensor itself is 12 plus stops of dynamic range, which in itself is a real boost. But you'll be able to, in the stills mode, use the dynamic range boost, the 13 plus stops of dynamic range boost. And it's going to have up to 75 frames per second in electronic shutter burst mode, and a 200 shot buffer. So at the maximum, you're not just limited to a sort of second, so you get a good 2.5 seconds worth of buffer. But remember, that's being emptied into the cards as well. And if you're reading it to a CF card, that buffer's not going to fill up easily. You're going to get a huge amount of shots, and that's raw. If you are shooting in, that's in standard noise mode. If you go into the, standard dynamic range. If you go into the dynamic range boost, you are then limited down to 60 frames a second. And the reason for that is it doesn't actually, you've got so much data going through that you can't basically get the dynamic range boost to work properly along with that. So they're given 60 frames a second on the dynamic range boost and 75 frames because they can actually handle that data on the standard, which again is 12 plus stops. Now, very quick explanation as to how the dynamic range boost is working. And this is a very simplistic explanation of it. Basically, it takes a signal from the sensor and puts it through two different amplification stages. One is a high gain stage. And what this does is it gives really clean shadows. It gives really, really clean shadows, lots of detail in the shadows, but it blows the highlights out, unfortunately. It clips the highlights very, very quickly. So you've got really good, fantastic, clean shadow signal. It also sends a signal through to a low gain stage, and that really gives fantastic highlight detail. It pulls highlights, it keeps it without clipping, so you're getting all the detail from the highlights, but unfortunately it creates a lot of noise in the shadows. And then what they do is they combine the two together and take the highlight detail from the low gain side and the shadow data from the high gain side and combine them together. Effectively, it's working as an HDR, because that's what it's doing. It's giving high dynamic range. But where in conventional stills cameras you'd be taking 2 or 3 or 5 or 7 shots, however many it is, to do a high definition, high dynamic range recording, this is doing it on sensor effectively, or on the amplification stage straight from the sensor. So it's effectively a 2-shot HDR. Excuse me, so I'm going to cough. A 2-shot HDR done in camera as a raw file, not saying that it's JPEG, as a raw file. And that's really good because that's how it's giving you that extra dynamic range. The rear screen on it is really interesting, whether you're for video or for stills photography. Lots of the videographers don't like the tilt swivel screen. They like the flip screen, but they'd also like to be able to see around the front. And the problem with the tilt swivel screen is as you swivel it, it gets caught up on the output socket. So if you've got cables, microphone cables, anything like that, power leads, HDMI leads, it gets caught up on that. This is a tilt screen, like in the old, like my AM1 Mark 1, but it also then flips sideways out, so it'll come around the front. So it doesn't impede any of the cables, but you can still see it from the front in the same way as a tilt swivel screen would work. Excellent. Inside, you'll find that there's some holes on the side, because there's a cooling fan. Now this cooling fan is there to cool down, not the sensor. The sensor's taken from the main body, but the cooling fan is there to cool down the Safe Express card and the engine, the data engine inside. And there is some concern about it's waterproof and things like that. What they were saying on there is don't drop it in water, don't immerse it in water and you'll be fine. But in actual fact, it's been already out on the SH1, on the S1H, the full frame camera from Lumix. It's been out there for about 2 years without any problems. And they were basically saying that you've got more issue from from where the lens goes on to the mount rather than this. So don't worry about water ingress on this. They're saying noise-wise, it's a coreless fan. So basically, it's a very low speed coreless fan, almost inaudible in noise. You're not going to get any noise on that picked up in the microphone, but it's also a variable fan. If you leave it on auto, it'll sort itself out, but there are manual overrides for it as well if you want to, if you do get problems on it. Let's see. It has high res mode. It doesn't have live composite, but the high res mode, and this again is really interesting from a photographer's point of view. It's 100 megapixel high res mode, whether handheld or tripod used. Let's say that again. It's 100 meg, whether handheld or tripod. And what it does is it takes multiple pictures and stitches them together. And it's quite clever because if you are doing something, that's either something moving in the shot, so you have a car moving for instance, or if you tend to move about too much yourself, it intelligently works out what's on there and it tries to take maybe one frame from that to give that image and then puts a high res together for the rest. Really impressive. So it takes into account moving objects. Autofocus wise, it still doesn't have phase detection, and basically they were saying on there for phase detection will take them well outside the realms of what they could be designing at the time. It does have, let's just pull back, where are we? Where's my notes on autofocus? I did do some notes on autofocus, believe it or not. Autofocus, it does have the contrast DFD autofocus. It's been highly improved. They've done a lot of work on the DFD, so hopefully it should be a lot better. And because of the higher dynamic range, they say that that's going to come better. And in fact, they say that the high dynamic range on this is giving equal, if not better, results than on the GH5S. The GH5S was a low resolution camera, so you had larger pixels to give you better dynamic range. So this is going to be really interesting on this. But the AF, as I say, it doesn't have phase detect, but it does have contrast and DFD. Let's see, where are we? It's all about, just about it, I would say. Right, all of the HFR, the high frame rate modes, have autofocus and audio. The variable frame rate does not. But at any point in the variable frame rate, if you've got something which is moving in there, you can press on the back to hit the focus instantaneously, and it'll pull into focus at that point. It's a full-size HDMI port as well, and the internal audio is interesting. You can still put the adapter on top to be able to put in a couple of XLRs, and that gives you 4 channels of audio. If you use the XLR plus the jack, then it gives you up to 4 channels of audio, or the internal microphone. And internal mic, as well as the jack socket on it, is giving you 24-bit 48 kilohertz recording, and that's on the internal. And the camera does also support external time codes as well, which is brought in on the GH5 Mark II. So that's a very quick summation, very fast and dirty sort of summation on that, but I think it's a really exciting time for what we're going to be getting from this. Lots and lots of features on the camera. I've only just brushed on the surface. The full feature list is available on Lumix's site, but go and have a look at that. There will be firmware updates coming for the camera, and also firmware updates for an awful lot of the lenses to enable them to be used with the camera to give best results. So if you are using Lumix lenses already, it's worth double checking if you get this camera that the firmware updates are done in your lenses as well as the camera to give you the maximum on this one. Hopefully this has taken you through an awful lot. If you found anything useful on this, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Give me a thumbs up if you would. If nothing else, just for staying up this late in the morning and trying to give you the details as best I can. And again, if you want to support this channel, there's a PayPal link underneath. But I'm going to go to bed. It's getting on for 2:30 now. I'm going to go to bed. I'm tired. Get myself some sleep. Relax my my aching face. I feel like I've been 10 rounds with Mike Tyson, to tell you the truth. But and he won. But whatever you're doing, enjoy your photography. If you do get into the things for this, I think it's going to be a really interesting time. If you get into the pre-orders for this, drop a few comments. If you're intending to use it, drop a few comments on what you think about the features on this. And if you do actually get in your hands and rewatch this video, drop us a comment or two and tell us how you get on with it. Until the next time, keep on taking your camera, keep on enjoying your photography. It's Brian James, that Make It 4/3 guy. See you next time. Bye-bye.